This podcast is a proud member of the Paranormality Podcast Network.
This week's episode is a pilgrimage down one of the deepest and most all-consuming rabbit holes of the paranormal that I have ever experienced. We are talking about black-eyed kids, and I'm so glad that I'm not alone in my voyage into the unexplained. Joining me today is the 5-time winner of the Lifetime Achievement Award for the most Lifetime Achievement Awards in a current lifetime, the unconquerable Stone.
I don't even know how you got that. That's brilliant. Introducing Xander, Master of Disguise and Global Memory Champion.
Global Memory Champion. What is a Global Memory Champion?
You know where you could... You should remember this.
I should remember that.
Because you won the championship. You're totally ruining my life. I have
no recollection of that.
Ruining it.
I was going to introduce you as, and I've actually kept this little nugget of world records over here on my script, because I was going to introduce you as the Guinness Book of World Records record holder for the longest hug ever given. And I'm going to let you guess. I'm going to let you guess. What do you think is the world record for the longest hug ever given?
18 hours and 16 minutes.
Really? Did you think? Okay, so it's 24 hours and 33 minutes, and it was done on the 13th of June.
A whole day. Gosh,
it's on the 13th of June, 2010. And I was like, I could beat that. I could beat that hug. 24 hours.
Yeah.
I was expecting weeks. I was expecting like really shockingly high numbers, like 158 hours or something. 24 hours and 33 minutes. That's a day and a half an hour. I'm sure that's easy to beat.
Eventually you have to go to the restroom.
Why?
So
Why? Couldn't you just pee where you are? I suppose the challenge of that is not peeing on the person that you're hugging.
Right? That would be uncomfortable.
Anyway, so according to the Guinness World Book of Records, the world's longest hug is currently held by Ron O'Neill and Teresa Kerr of Canada. Their embrace was achieved on the 13th of June, 2010 and lasted for 24 hours and 33 minutes. Okay, so today we are talking about the black-eyed kids. And like I said in the introduction, this is one of those topics that once you start going around and once you start going around the internet and down the rabbit hole of this topic, it is absolutely endless and all-consuming. What I want to ask, Stone, is when it comes to the black-eyed kids, how the hell does science explain this one?
False. False. That's all we have. Actually, through the research, science writer Sharon A. Hill didn't find any documentation of black-eyed children encounters. And basically, it's been urban mythology that has been passed around. The first stories, I think, starting in mid-1990s. Yeah. And I'm sure you know more about that and will tell us more about that. But basically, they chalk it up to creepypasta, which I was unfamiliar with that term. Are you familiar with that term?
I am familiar with creepypasta, yes.
Yes. Well, tell us what it is.
Okay, so creepypasta is essentially like internet threads of creepy stories, basically, like just scary horror stories, sci-fi, paranormal stories. I've always wondered about the name creepypasta, though, and it's maybe something that I should Google. It's like, what a weird thing, like odd spaghetti. How many brainstorming sessions did they have before they settled on creepypasta? You know, disconcerting macaroni.
Right? It feels a little old school MTV to me. Like
it really does.
It's the 2:00 in the morning. Creepy pasta.
Like, okay. Have another hit of the crack pipe, Bob. All right.
Or one of the rejected shows from the Food Network. Creepy pasta. The only other thing was, of course, going back to one of our previous episodes is sleep paralysis. So if people are saying that they see it at night, then it could be sleep paralysis, and it goes back to the shadow people, etc.
Sure.
But aside from that, it's pretty much debunked with the whole science community and attributed to urban legend.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I hope that the listeners and anybody who's interested in the paranormal, who has a lot of investment in the paranormal, is going to strongly disagree with us on today's episode and say that there is evidence of black-eyed kids. Because through my research, this is basically the conclusion that I've come to as well, is that it is just urban legend. And exactly like you said, it started and it peaked around the mid-90s. I believe the year was 1996. And it is something that we're going to chat about as well. It comes from a reporter in Texas. His name is Brian Bethel. And I've got a lot to say about Brian Bethel. When I went down the rabbit hole, I went down the Brian Bethel rabbit hole. That sounds really dirty. But I went down Brian Bethel's hole, and I discovered everything was not as what it seemed.
That's for another show.
That's a different show. Sorry, wrong podcast.
That's another
episode. But yeah, look, I mean, so one of the things that I noticed through my research is that it really does seem to have come around. It's a modern urban legend, so it's not even one that dates back to folklore. And as you know from previous episodes, things like when we've done hauntings and the sleep paralysis episode and even reincarnation and past lives, one of the things that I like doing is I like to explore folklore and how different cultures explain these sorts of phenomena. And this is one of those that I could find absolutely nothing. I could find, well, when I say absolutely nothing, I could find very, very little. And exactly, I read the same article that you did by Sharon Hill, exactly as Sharon has said. There is just no documentation or reports or historical documents or accounts that can back up this idea of black-eyed kids. And I'm sure that somebody out there in the paranormal community is going to call me out on that, and I welcome them to. Please email us at info@excesspodcast.com and protest and give us your evidence. But yeah, I mean, there's somewhere where the information just stops.
This is, though, future folklore,
yes,
when you think about it.
Yes.
Future folklore. The folklore is being created right now. So 200 years from now, when we're reincarnated and do another podcast,
yes,
we'll come back to this as this is the folklore.
Maybe that's what we've been doing in all these past lifetimes. Like, I know podcasting is the medium a la mode for this. Maybe in the past we've been like chiseling on stone wall temples and stuff and getting our message out there. You know what I mean? It might have been
I'm positive.
We might be responsible for all the UFO engravings on all the various temples around the world, and we just didn't know it. That's what we do as creators, as content creators.
The pyramids, that was us.
That was us with the chisels.
You're welcome, world.
We were there with the chisels 3 lifetimes ago.
Crawled up to the top. We have a little excess logo up there.
Somewhere, really just close. Nobody's found it yet, but it's there. Look, I honestly don't know what to believe when it comes to the black-eyed kids. I've drawn my own conclusions. And as I said, I really do think that there's going to be people in the paranormal community who are going to object or try and say that there is this type of evidence. And I really, really welcome the feedback because I would like to see it. I could not find any evidence in my research myself that dates any further back than the early 90s, even though I did find, when I say that I couldn't find the evidence, I could find accounts that report black-eyed children earlier than the 90s, but they're modern-day reports. So, it could be, and anybody could write a story and say that this happened in 1950, but I'm posting about it in 2013. Like, if you can show me the documentation from the 1950s, if you could show me, it doesn't even have to be a police report, like a blurb in a newspaper, something written in somebody's diary. I know the internet wasn't around then, but just anything that kind of backs it up as not being a modern day phenomenon. And when I did the research just never ended. One thing led to another, and it would lead to a name, and then I would research that name, and then an awful lot. What actually I found very interesting is that an awful lot of things like links that I clicked, when you go on a website and it's got like a piece of text that's got a link associated to it. When I would click on the link would be dead. When it would
not found,
it's a 404, baby. I found a lot of 404s. Like, there was an awful lot of 404s in this, which, I mean, that's odd for things especially when you're looking in like a very specific corner of the internet, like, the specific black-eyed kids corner of the internet. It's odd that so many links would be broken. I'm 1 or 2, I can understand, but that many, which means that a lot of information has been removed.
Which that does actually add credibility to the story. Oddly,
it's definitely aliens. But the documentation, basically, you can't fact check any of the accounts and reports because it stops. You end up with 404 dead links, or it just goes to nowhere. Or people make anonymous reports of these, and you simply can't follow them up. Or you find them on places like Reddit and Creepypasta, where fiction and fact are 2 very blurry lines there, where it tends to lean more towards fiction. I watched a lot of YouTube movies. I watched movies about black-eyed kids, and like YouTube documentaries about black-eyed kids, and loads and loads and loads of fake videos of black-eyed kids where, people had created these videos to look as though it was a black-eyed kids experience. So honestly, I'm more of a skeptic about black-eyed kids after doing the research than
Right.
than before when I had started.
I was very excited that this is one episode that I had zero experience with, especially after I did some research and felt like it was urban mythology as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you do have any experience with the black-eyed kids, do let us know. And I think if anybody was going to have experienced it, it would have been you.
That's what I was excited about. I was like, well, see, that's one that I can check off that I haven't had the experience with. And then the more I researched it, I thought, oh, well, that's why I haven't had any experience with it.
Well, look, there is a content creator on YouTube. For the life of me, I can't remember his name or his YouTube channel name or anything like that right now. But he went into studying, like he was determined to find evidence of black-eyed kids. I'm sure somebody who's listening is going to be able to tell me what his name was. And so he basically identified that in all the evidence, I'm doing the air quote things to you. Nobody else can see, but I'm doing that 2-finger air quote thing. The evidence of black-eyed kids videos and such, that he had isolated something of like a subsonic sound that was in all of these videos. So he isolated the sound. And then he created like, I don't know, a playlist with this subsonic sound. Basically, he made a recording using this subsonic sound that was available in all these different videos. And he played this at night and he set up his video camera. And apparently what he said is that he was attracting black-eyed children. And these black-eyed children then were caught on camera, and then he got too afraid and he deleted the videos and he decided never to do it again. And it's just this, yeah, exactly. For the listeners who can't see, there's a very big eye roll coming out of Stone right now. And I wholeheartedly agree because it's such a well-fabricated story. It's just a little bit too well constructed, you know, like, I can't, it was so scary.
Oh, you deleted
the footage. It was
Shocking.
too scary for the world. But yeah, so look, the earliest story or the earliest recounts I could find, and please, again, bear in mind that this is a recount that I find on a modern day website that has been recently published within the past decade or so. And it talks about an experience that happened in 1950s. And, you know, again, no evidence. There's no first person account of this. There's no recording of this interview that I could find. And it just doesn't exist. So the one that I found that is from the 1950s, it was experienced by the 16-year-old boy in Virginia. And even in the recount of this, it says that he is known only as Harold. But very convenient that he's only known by one name and a pretty common English name. So it was experienced by the 16-year-old boy from Virginia, known only as Harold, and was researched and investigated by David Weatherly. Do you know who David Weatherly is? Okay, no. So David Weatherly is quite a well-known paranormal investigator. He does everything under the paranormal umbrella: ufology, demonology, cryptozoology. Like, he pretty much covers it all. He's an author. He investigates claims of the paranormal. He does all these things. So David Weatherly, for it to be said that it was researched by and investigated by David Weatherly, kind of adds a little bit of credibility to it. But, it doesn't seem like David Weatherly ever put any, validation on the actual story itself. Right. He never said
no stamp,
not like David Weatherly approved. They do exist. It's not out there. Right. So this Harold boy, he was reportedly walking home one afternoon when he came across another boy who he didn't recognize from his little Virginia town. And the boy was leaning against a fence as if he was waiting for somebody. And Harold said that he was about 12 years old, that the other boy was about 12 years old. Harold tried to speak to him. He said hello, but the 12-year-old didn't respond. So Harold turns to leave, and he was about to go back home. And then the boy suddenly walked up to him, and he said, "I want to go to your house. You're going to walk me up to your house." It's then said that Harold felt this chill rush through his body, and he wasn't sure what to say. And he reportedly didn't really understand why this boy that he didn't know was asking to go to his house. The boy then looked up at him, and Harold noticed that the boy's eyes were pitch black and they had no whites of the eyes whatsoever. And he was just staring at him, what he quoted, which David Weatherly quoted in this article as desperate assertiveness. I don't know what a desperate, assertive, black-eyed glare looks like, but okay, we'll take his word for it. Harold felt glued to the ground and he felt very afraid and he didn't know how to respond to the boy. His instincts basically told him, like, when you get that feeling, get the fuck out of here, just run. So right. Harold was...
So many dates.
Pretty much. I call that Saturday night. But basically,
That's
Harold's
just a normal weekend for me.
it's the get out of fucking Dodge feeling. So Harold's instincts
Coming,
were
coming.
Harold's instincts were to get the fuck out of Dodge. And his thoughts were all just focused on like how fast he could just get out of here. And he said, but he actually just felt glued to the spot. He couldn't move. So despite all of his instincts saying run, he physically couldn't do it. So essentially whatever happened after that is that Harold turned and he ran away faster than his legs could carry him. And he didn't want to look back because, and this again is in quotes, for fear the weird child was following him as he was running away. He reportedly heard this other boy let out a wailing scream of a bobcat, again in inverted quotes, or a scream that sounded very similar to that of a bobcat. I have never heard a bobcat scream, but I imagine it's quite a scary thing. But even all the same, he still wasn't willing to turn around. Harold reported later that he commented, I think I must have really angered that boy. He screamed out and I thought for sure he was coming to get me, and insisted that the boy he encountered was solid. It was not a ghost. When he got home, he basically went and told his parents about it. I think as any kid would. I just saw a creepy kid screaming at me in the streets. And apparently his parents believed him, and his father went out with a shotgun looking for what they believed to be the devil. And the black-eyed child was nowhere to be found. So still, Harold's mother demanded that they take the boy to a priest just to be safe, to get him blessed, because they believed that he had had an encounter with the devil himself, the devil in disguise. Harold's father also...
Shotgun wouldn't go very far.
You know, like really...
Again, everybody's always with guns.
With the guns. Always Hashtag America. But Harold's father also later spoke to nearby residents and neighbors to ask if they had encountered anything strange. And a couple of the residents in the area said that they had recently heard a bobcat. Golly gee, could it be a bobcat? Still, none of them had ever seen any out-of-place children. And, you know, again... I mean, okay, so just what kind of stood out to me in this story is that it's a boy walking alone in, you know, what seems to be a very kind of small town, or in like kind of maybe a rural type of an area where there's not a lot of people around because no one else saw this kid. Right. So it suggests that he's in an isolated area. And if you're a young teen, I don't know about you, I grew up in a very rural area, and I remember walking around places by myself and getting the chills. Like, you know, you get kind of freaked out because if something happens, no one's here to help me. Sure. So you're kind of, you know, your defenses are up. But one of the things that really stood out to me about this story is that the moment he got home and he told his parents, their first assumption was, it's the devil. So that kind of suggests to me that these people are very religious or very superstitious. And anything that, you know, their kid says, I just saw something with black eyes, you know, I mean, if the first thing mother does is to say that you have just encountered the devil, maybe there's a little bit of religious extremism going on there. I don't know. I mean, would you say that Virginia has got a lot of very devout kind of extremist religion people? He asked.
Having grown up in southern West Virginia.
Yeah.
Yes, I definitely think it's... I think that that's more predominant there.
Yeah. So,
but you would think that you would go for the let's check out this physical non-ghost material kid first before you immediately leap to
it's the devil. Yeah.
You start with the child, then you move on to the devil. It's sort of a natural progression, not just immediately, it was a demon.
It was the devil. So look, I mean, that was back in the 1950s. And again, this is something where it's a story that's being said it happened in the 1950s, being recounted in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, not the mid 2000s, like 2013 is when the story was published online. So, yeah, I mean,
75 years later.
75 years later, you know, I mean, like I forget what I had for dinner last week. I mean, we're talking like a weird thing that happened 75 years ago. And I would also like to know, like, what kind of brought this topic up? Like, how did David Weatherly hear about this story? How did he find Harold? You know, like, where did it originate? How did this news come to David Weatherly? They posted
it on a blog and Google in the 1950s.
There we go.
Obvious
logical answer. The next one that I could find that dates back anything pre-1996 or specifically 2013, which is a very significant date that we'll get to later, is an encounter that is said to have happened in a place called Ain in France. And this is in the village of Ain in France, in the Picardy region of France. And there was reportedly an encounter with black-eyed children in 1974. And it involved two men, one by the name of Alain G. and the other one by Patrick V. Their account, their story is a little bit different to other ones that I've read because it kind of revolves around a single property. And usually black-eyed kids accounts, if you go and look at any of the Reddit threads or any of the stories online, it's usually that they're approaching you or they're coming to your house and knocking on your door or approaching your car, or you're seeing them out there somewhere, or hitchhiking or something like that. Whereas this one, they saw these black-eyed children on a property in France that they were driving past, which then suggests that black-eyed kids have homes. But, you know, and do demonic entities have homes? Anyway, but so they reportedly encountered the black-eyed children at around 3 p.m., which again, a little bit different because it's always usually nighttime accounts. They reported them around 3 p.m. while leisurely driving, as one does, around the small village and enjoying the autumn weather in the Picardy region of France. Vive la France! They stopped their car to do a U-turn in the road, and upon turning, they glanced into the property alongside them. They glanced into the courtyard, and they saw 5 mysterious figures who appeared to be looking at them. 3 reportedly stood in the background, and they were all huddled together. And another figure was tracing its hands along the home. Now, there is an actual like a drawing of this account, and I don't know where the drawing comes from. I don't know if one of these, Elaine or Patrick, did the drawing. In fact, you can go to Jim Harold's Paranormal Podcast website. I believe you can see it there. But all you really have to do is type in 1974 black-eyed kids encounter in France, and this image will come up on Google. And the tracing its hands along the side of the home, the way that it's represented in the picture is that it's a small figure standing, kind of running its hands along the wall, like almost as if it were feeling its way while it were walking down the wall, like, you know, feeling along a flat surface. So again, just a bit of an odd visual thing to see. But anyway, so there's these 3 kind of standing huddled together, the other one tracing its hands along the home. And then the last one stood facing the 2 men. And they were all reportedly about 4 feet tall, so short little guys. And they had earthy yellow skin and noses which were compressed inward, which I can't even really kind of mental picture. Like, how is a nose compressed inward?
Voldemort.
Exactly. I'm like, I immediately start thinking of belly buttons and how you sometimes have an innie or an outie. Like,
they had innies.
They had innie noses. Innies. Ew. Like, when you sneeze, what happens? Where does it go? Ew.
If I'm thinking about driving, first of all, let's go back to science. Even if you're driving slow, you're past the person before you can see that much detail. And the other part is seeing their eyes. Like, I don't think even if I was right beside a sidewalk, I would notice what color somebody's eyes were. Sure. You know, when you're driving, you're driving. So.
So they do say that they'd stopped the car to do a U-turn, and upon turning, they glanced. But again,
they're in movement.
Exactly. They're in movement. And you're also executing a pretty tricky driving thing there. You know, you're doing a U-turn.
That makes it even worse. It wasn't just a straight shot.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's even like angles of perception at work here. Like you're moving in an angled way, in an arc. How did you manage to keep your eye on this without continuing to drive into a fence or something? Anyway, whatever. Right. I agree with you that they were in motion at the time, and to notice that amount of detail on 4 different, was it 4 or 5? To notice that amount of detail on 5 different beings, like what their eyes looked like, what their skin color looked like, what one of them was doing, that 3 of them were huddled together, that one was standing here, the other one was doing this with its hands on the wall. It's far too much detail to catch in such a brief moment.
The slowest car ever.
Slowest U-turn in the world.
Debunked.
But yeah, so and to notice like a detail as fine as that their noses were compressed inwards, and obviously, you know, I mean, we're laughing about it and saying like their noses were like inward facing, but I think they just mean like kind of flattened noses, like you said, like Voldemort. Right. So their noses which were compressed inwards, and that they had long hair all the way down to their waists. They were all dressed in the same long garments which almost reached the ground, and were decorated with multicolored spots, and were also described as having eyes which were said to be as solid black hemispheres, the size of billiard balls. Them some big fucking peepers. Like a billiard ball is a lot bigger than an eye.
That's how they saw it from the road. Yeah. I should have let you finish. I didn't realize they had pool ball sized eyes. I feel so foolish now.
Noticeable noticeable at a distance. But it's all these other details. Like, for them to have picked up that many details, multicolored spots on long garments and all these other details that we've been talking about, it's exactly like you say, there's a little bit too much detail here to be able to have absorbed all that detail in just doing a U-turn.
If they were walking by, I might have bought it a little bit.
Or if you had stopped and stared.
Driving and doing a U-turn? Yeah.
Anyway,
rough.
so it goes on to say that Alain had rolled the window on his side of the car to get it rolled the window down to get a better look, and his blood ran cold when faced with the being that was facing towards him. The being closest to the car waved at the men and gestured them to come into the courtyard. Still, the men became unnerved and very frightened. Elaine reportedly screamed in terror for Patrick to drive away. I'm imagining, these are two French guys out driving in the countryside. Yeah, God, here comes my awful French accent. And Patrick, drive away, mon ami. The children.
They're now cartoon characters.
They're cartoon characters with just who speak English in a French accent.
Version of this story as follows.
So he screams in terror for Patrick to drive away, and the two then drove away very quickly from the area and to a nearby town. So again, it sounds like a rural, isolated area. There's nobody else around to witness this.
But drove away. They're already in motion. Why would you tell somebody
they stopped
to
the
drive
car? So he stopped.
Driving.
They stopped the car.
Oh,
so they stopped the car to roll the window down.
And he rolled down the window. Okay.
Look at the freaky fucking kids standing in the courtyard.
A very friendly kid just saying, "Come
here, come in.
Stop staring at us, weirdo. Just come talk to us. What are you looking at?"
They had told several locals of what they'd witnessed, and they returned later with some more people, but they couldn't find any sign of the figures that they'd seen before. How convenient. When investigators spoke to the residents in the area 8 months later, one neighbor reportedly stated that he had also seen the strange figures, and he believed that they were children and had seen them playing in the road and thought that they seemed to be dressed in yellow oilcloth. Do you know what oilcloth is?
I do not.
Probably like oilcloth is like it's like a waterproof type of material. Hands down, probably the most uncomfortable material that you're going to be wearing. Children wouldn't really be wearing it to play in the streets. And it's like it's the type of thing that like a fisherman might wear, or like it's like protective work gear type of clothing. And you look again, zero sources. I cannot find the original article for this online. I can find it posted about on other paranormal sites, but I cannot find any original reports of this, any original newspaper reports.
Being children would explain why they were 4 foot tall. Here's the other question I have.
Children are short? Hang on, wait, what? Must be
why
demons.
Why aren't those kids taller? But let's say they were men, 4 men, long hair, the whole story. Do you think there's any urban mythology of these 4 men talking about the 2 strange Frenchmen that drove by and wouldn't come over? Because I bet there's a reverse urban legend about the 2 men driving that did a U-turn, rolled down their window, and drove away really fast.
Stared at them, and then screamed. And then
it's
left.
more odd from their perspective than from the people in the car, in my opinion.
It's
like,
true.
Why are you rolling down your window and staring at me?
It's true. So look, I mean, those are the 2 reports that I can find that predate any of the modern urban or the modern recounts of black-eyed children. We have a favor to ask of our listeners. If you're enjoying listening to the Xander and Stone podcast, do us a solid and tell your friends, family, even your frenemies about the Xander and Stone Science and Supernatural podcast. We don't mind if you share the links of our episodes on social media, because sharing is caring. While you're at it, hit that subscribe or follow button on your podcast app and leave us a comment and a rating. So, where did all these modern accounts of the black-eyed kid legends start? And essentially, it's from the mid-1990s on. Here's a big shocker for you: the internet. It has been circulating practically ever since the mid-90s, when this blogger, Brian Bethel, I say blogger, but he's actually also a reporter as well. He claims to have reported the first black-eyed kids encounter in Abilene in Texas in the spring or summer, because he can't remember which one. He just remembers that he was wearing shorts, of 1996. And he wrote about it on the Ghost Hunter Forum in 1998, 2 years after he had the experience. He says, and this is recounting his experience, he says that he was parked in his car in front of a movie theater in the evening, making out a check to drop off for his internet provider, when 2 boys aged 9 to 12 wearing hoodies knocked on his driver's side car window. In quotes, I was immediately gripped by an incomprehensible, soul-racking fear. I had no idea why. He cracked the car window, rolled down the car window, and he learned from them that they wanted a ride home so that they could go and get money to see the Mortal Kombat movie that was playing at the theater, which, of course, is plausible enough. But all throughout this exchange, his irrational fear continued to grow. And he says that he had no reason to be frightened of these two boys, but he just was. He was very frightened of them. He saw that the movie had already started, so driving anywhere and back would mean that the kids would have missed most of the movie anyway. And his report continues to say, all the while, the spokesman, one of the kids that was talking, uttered assurances, things like, it won't take long, we're just two little kids, we don't have a gun or anything. And, that last sentence is a little bit unnerving, because why do you have to reassure somebody that you don't have a gun? Like, don't worry. I'm not armed.
America.
True. There we go. Yeah, true. In a short time, he had basically broken his, gaze with the one that was speaking, and something had changed in his mind, and he basically exploded into this vortex of all-consuming terror. And both boys were staring at him, and he noticed that they had these coal black eyes, and he describes them as being soulless orbs with two great swathes of starless night. # dramatic mash. Definitely a writer. He then goes on to say, I full on freaked out inside while trying to appear wholly sane and calm. I made whatever excuses came to mind, all of them designed to get me the hell out of there. I wrapped my hand around the gear shift, threw the car into reverse, and began to roll up the window, apologizing all the while. My fear must have been evident. The boy in the back wore a look of confusion. The spokesman, the one that he was talking to, banged sharply on the window as I rolled it upward. His words, full of anger, echo in my mind even today. We can't come in. Way to fuck up the quote.
Unless we're invited.
Exactly that. Absolutely, exactly that. We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in. Which has led a lot of people to associate the black-eyed kids with vampires, because vampires, of course, can't come in unless they're invited in.
Right.
He then goes on to say, I drove out of the parking lot in blind fear, and I'm surprised I didn't sideswipe a car or two along the way. I stole a quick look into my rearview mirror before peeling out into the night. The boys were gone. Even if they had run, I don't believe that there was any place that they could have hidden from that view so quickly. And that was in 2013. Okay, so let's break this down. So Bethel says that he had had this experience in 1996. What he then goes on to do is to go to a paranormal forum and to post about it in 1998, 2 years after it had happened. It starts to become viral on the internet in 2013 when this story starts really kind of percolating around in different forums and groups and, paranormal corners of the internet. This happens to coincide with the release of a movie called The Black-Eyed Kids. So, it's all just a little bit too convenient. But now, basically what I did is I started trying to look into Brian Bethel himself and the person who made this account or reported this account. Okay, so first things first, he is a reporter. He is a professional journalist and a writer. And to me, that speaks to the fact that he's got command of the language and he knows how to use words to manipulate people and the power of using, the written word as a medium to get messages out there. So for somebody who's a writer to be able to come up with a rather fantastic, well-worded story that strikes fear into people seems a little bit too convenient for me. If Stephen King suddenly started talking about his encounters with the paranormal, I think we would all think Stephen, maybe you've written one too many books. You know what I mean? Maybe all of those horror stories that you've been writing all of this time, it's just, kind of fed into your reality now and it's distorting your sense of reality. And there's nothing to say that Brian Bethel, this reporter who's got, possibly a very good, vivid imagination and is able to construct a story well, might have just been using all of his skills to construct something that was going to get a very strong public reaction and turn into something viral. So what I did is I started looking at different interviews. What I wanted to do is I wanted to find a video where I could actually listen to Brian himself recounting the stories. And I was lucky enough that I actually did find one. So I found on YouTube, an interview with Brian Bethel that was broken into two parts, and it was done by a paranormal investigator. One thing that kind of annoyed me about the interview, I'll try and remember to post the links in the show notes to the actual interviews as well. But one of the things that annoyed me about the interview was how the person who was interviewing Brian would often feed him kind of answers at the end of his answers. So he would get to a certain point in his answer and stall and not be able to find the language. And the interviewer would then finish the sentence for him, and Brian would pick up with that language afterwards. And just from an interviewing perspective, that's not terribly good practice. There was also something else that I noticed while I was watching this interview with Brian Bethel, the paranormal investigator, and it was not something that I'd intended to take notes on. It just kind of presented itself to me while I was watching the interview. And through my work doing interviewing people and all sorts of things, something I've always had a lot of interest in is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and in particular, how language and body language are connected. So when people are, explaining something and they're very passionate about the story that they're telling, they will use a lot of physical gestures. And there's a few indicators, and you can go and research this. There's loads and loads of information about this online. There are a few indicators that you can look for when people are either telling the truth or they're mixing fact and fiction together. Now, one of the things that I noticed about Brian Bethel while he was doing this interview is he struggled a lot to maintain eye contact with the interviewer while he was recounting the story. He seemed to always have his gaze cast down. And, I think everybody out there knows that when somebody's not telling the whole truth, they tend to have a lot of trouble making eye contact with someone. If you watch the interview, and it's broken into two parts, and I think collectively it's about 45 minutes long, I would challenge anybody to take a stopwatch and just time how much direct eye contact he has while he's talking to the interviewer and telling his story versus how much he looks away from the interviewer while he's recounting his story. So to me, that kind of was an indicator that maybe the story that he's telling isn't entirely true. And there's a lot of other kind of indicators that you can look for when somebody's fabricating or recalling fact. And one of the things is whether while recounting a story, somebody either looks to the left or looks to the right. And by that, I don't mean, moving your whole head left or right. I mean where your eyes kind of automatically move to. Now, when you're recalling facts and information, and you'll probably notice that I'm actually hyper aware of the fact that I'm doing it right now. When you're recalling facts and information, your gaze, your eyes tend to shift to the left, because that is where the logic centers of our brain are and where we store long-term or long and medium-term memory or facts. So if you're recalling numbers, events that happened in your life, things that you have no doubt are factual and real events, we tend to look to the left. When we are accessing imagination or we're constructing a story, our eyes tend to shift to the right, because the right is where, the imagination side of the brain is. And something that I noticed about Brian Bethel is that throughout his interview, his eyes kept shifting over to the right. It was almost like he was constructing the story as the interviewer was asking him more probing questions. So, if he was recalling the answers to these probing questions from facts and events that had happened to him, he would have probably been looking to the left. The fact that he was looking to the right indicated to me that he was constructing the story and the facts around the story in the moment. He was accessing the imagination side of his brain. Now, those, like I said, again, he was looking down, which is an indicator to me that he couldn't make eye contact with the person he was talking to about the story. He was looking more to the right, which means that he was activating the construction and the imagination side of the brain. The other thing that I also noticed as well is just a couple of bits of language that he used that seemed to almost suggest that he had constructed and planned the story to go in a certain direction. And one of the answers that he gave when he had recounted the story, and then he said towards the end, just before he was going to tell the interviewer that the children had black eyes, he said, and then the big reveal, they had black eyes. And I was like, well, that's a very kind of showman, kind of, constructed fictional way of putting it. Like in writing terms or in theater terms, when you talk, or in stage magic terms, you talk about the big reveal, the big showstopper. And it just seemed odd that was his choice of words. The big reveal, they had black eyes. So it was almost like he had built up the story to the point of drama. And that is something that anybody who creates fiction or works in the theater or anything like that, we know about those techniques. Now, one of the other things I also noticed, and this was just something that I picked up on the Wikipedia page about him, is that he had said that he experienced this in 1996. He had written about it on a forum in 1998, and he said that he had only revealed on the forum to a group of trusted people who were on this paranormal forum. And then it had gotten leaked onto the rest of the internet. How very convenient. Again, turns out you can't trust them, Brian. But it's almost like if you were going to choose to put a story in a place where you know that the story is going to go viral and spread, what better place to choose than a group of paranormal people on a thread on the internet? Right. But in the wiki page, you can actually see, and anybody who goes to the Brian Bethel Black Eyed Kids wiki page can see that there's a quote there that says that he had decided to follow up the urban legend with an FAQ because people were demanding it. Now that's in quotes. He had decided to follow up on the legend with an FAQ page because people were demanding it. He used the word legend in that. So there's just far too many things that kind of indicated to me that he was lying. There's a lot of places, like I said, where the interviewer actually finishes the sentences for him because he was stumbling so much through his answer. And, again, it's one of those things that, like, when people have grilled Bob Lazar, a technique that a master liar or a master deceiver would use is that they will spin lots and lots and lots of stories in an attempt to avoid actually answering the question that you've asked. There's a very good interview with Bob Lazar and Joe Rogan where Bob Lazar basically spins and spins and spins until he notices that part of what he's saying, and it's all sort of extrapolated information that doesn't necessarily have much to do with the question that you've asked. But what they do is that a master deceiver or a master storyteller will look at visual cues from the person that they're talking to see where they become most engaged with what you're saying, and then they will spin off in that direction. So it's almost like I'm speaking. I found a hook, something you're interested in. I'm going to go in that direction because that seems to be something that you're buying into. And it's something
like a fortune teller.
Like a fortune teller. Yes, exactly like these fake psychics and things where they find a single piece of information that you seem to buy into. And they're like, okay, that's the golden ticket. I'm going to keep going on that. So he stumbles through his answers. He what I've named fluffing. He fluffs a lot before he gets to an actual fact or an actual answer. So one of the things that the interviewer asked him was to describe the features of the children other than their eyes. So that, the fact that they've got these black eyes is the most standout feature about them. But the interviewer actually said to him, what other description, like what else can you tell me? What else did they look like? And my God, did he fluff his way through this answer for a good solid 2 minutes. Now, there was also something else that I noticed that he was doing at this time as well. And I wish the viewers or the listeners could see what I'm doing right now. But basically, he would put his hand up to his face, touch the top of his cheeks, basically like if you're kind of cradling your mouth, and he would wipe down before answering. Now, I don't know if you've ever tried to suppress a smirk before, but what do? You touch your cheeks and you push the muscles of your cheeks down and push the corners of your mouth down as if you're trying to wipe the smile off your face. Now, I noticed when the interviewer asked him to describe them, his hand went up to his mouth. I'm actually doing it now. That's why the microphone's probably getting a bit muted. But his hand went up to his mouth and he almost seemed to kind of like wipe down as if he was trying to wipe a smirk off his face or hide an indicator of deceit is what I caught from that. And he touches his mouth in kind of like a downward motion. And again, he dropped his eyes.
Well, and the FBI, when you go through their list of what they're doing during interrogations, one of the things they look for is if they're touching their face, because that's a big clue. That's a big red flag.
Big indicator. Yeah. So essentially, when they asked him, when the interviewer asked him about describe any more features, the way that he was starting to describe them, he described the one that he was talking to as having like an olive type of skin, like a Mediterranean olive skinned. But in previous accounts, they'd all been described as being very pale skinned. He he touched on this very, very briefly and then went and continued to tell his story. And at this point in the story, what he started talking about was how he had noticed that his hand was almost reaching for the latch on the car door, but he managed to stop it just in time. Now, I think that you had mentioned a little bit earlier while we were prepping to do the episode that you had read a story where it says that he was actually unlocking the door, like he found himself unlocking the door. He felt
like he had to psychically unlock the door.
So there's, again, a little bit of a discrepancy in the way that story is told. But he then starts talking about that. And then as he continues the story, he then starts to talk about other descriptive elements of these two children. that never came up in his original answer when he was asked to describe them. And it's almost to me like he had allowed himself time to process some more information before giving himself that answer. So he said, olive skinned, and then quickly moved on with the rest of the story about reaching for the latch and noticing his hand. And then he says, oh, and the one with the curly hair. Now, he said the one with the curly hair that I was talking to, and the other boy had freckles. Now, if somebody's going to ask you to describe somebody, and features like curly hair and freckles are the most dominant kind of, descriptions that stand out to you the most, why were they not part of the original answer? Why are you only arriving at these throwaway details attached to a different fact? He's got you focusing on this fact that he was psychically, being pushed to open the door. And now the one with the curly hair. So he's kind of peppering other facts, again, I put in inverted in air quotes, facts that to answer a previous question, but he's got your attention on something else. He's got your attention on the door. So it's almost like he's trying to add credibility to the answer that he didn't give a little bit earlier.
Right. And also, how many people do you know with olive skin that have freckles?
Oh, no, sorry.
That's
my mistake. It was the olive skin boy had curly hair, and the second child
other one was pale.
Described as freckled. But again, it's if that's such a standout feature, this freckled child standing by, why did it not come up in your original description when asked to describe them? You glazed straight over it and then continued with your story, almost as if you were being cognitively allowed more time to come up with description, to fabricate these things. Now, the other thing that he mentioned as well is that the way that the children spoke to him, and a couple of the things that he, just to paraphrase what they were saying to him, they were saying things like, "Hey, mister, we need a ride." The way he describes the language that the children use in this interview, the way he describes it to the interviewer, is smoothed and very practiced. And he was talking about the black-eyed kids being able to use words to manipulate, and they had great mastery of the language and were able to manipulate the words. Now, I'm sorry, but a phrase like, "Hey, mister, we need a ride," is not exactly a masterful manipulation of language. So again, it was just something where he had taken this very small, simple fact and just expanded on it and expanded on it and expanded on it, but much later in the story, or much later in his recount of it. So the facts seem to grow. The longer the story is told, the bigger the facts become, and the more nuanced the facts become, and the more detailed facts become. And to me, it just took away a lot of his credibility.
When you mentioned that they were going to see a movie, to see Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
And it was in 1996. I immediately Googled it because I was thinking that movie didn't come out in 1996. It came out in 1992. And so in one of the counts, he says to see the new movie Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
That's 4 years later. What movie is playing in a movie theater or something 4 years later? That seems like the most obvious fact of this story being wrong.
Did we Google, are there any like Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3? I think there's a few in the franchise.
He just says Mortal Kombat.
He does just say Mortal Kombat. You're right. So look, I mean, again, I invite any people who've explored this topic, and I know that there's lots of them because the internet is just absolutely crammed full of information about the black-eyed kids, and various podcasters who might actually stumble across this episode as well. I really do invite them in a most sincere way to come and change my mind about this. I honestly believe that Brian Bethel fabricated the entire story.
Lies.
And what I tried to do is I tried to find other articles written by Brian Bethel. They're very difficult to come by on the internet for some reason, but again, maybe I was just not looking in the right places. I tried to find out. I even Googled, like, has the story of the black-eyed kids, has it in any way helped his career, other than putting a spotlight on him as the guy that told the story? And it doesn't necessarily seem like he's been, offered any big movie deals or anything like that. He did do an episode of a TV show. I forget the name of the TV show now. But he was asked to do this episode of a TV show. And he says that, look, he didn't make any money off doing the episode of the TV show. But, as somebody, and you'll know this as well, as somebody who's been a writer and who's worked in the arts and things like that, any publicity is good publicity, and it doesn't necessarily need to be paid. If you're getting your name out there, you're associated with being the person who brought the story to light, and people are going to want to come and talk to you about it, and you're getting lots of attention about it. And that in itself is the reward, because, next time people hear read a story by Brian Bethel, if he's talking about the local Walmart being shut down, they'll be like, hey, that's the guy that did the report on the black-eyed kids. You know what I mean? So it does give him a little bit of a name in
Here's the other thing, though. As a reporter, if something that extraordinary happened to you, it's kind of shocking that you'd want to keep it under wraps. Like, here's something so magical and mystical, and you're like, oh, I accidentally, I put it on this forum and it accidentally leaked.
Yeah.
What reporter is wanting to put a phenomenal story like that, just trying to hide it away?
Exactly.
That's bizarre to me.
And in fact, I had the same thought, and I'm glad you brought that up, because, it's exactly like you say. If a reporter, somebody whose job it is to go and investigate these things, to get down to the nitty gritty of it, to find details, why did he just stop at one story? Why has he not explored the black-eyed kids topic even further? Why does it? Where's
the book?
Exactly. Why does it stop and start? Absolutely. I agree with you. Why does it stop and start with one story? And it's, and even I'll give him in his defense in the interview, even he says that the story kind of then evolved into something that it's not. So you can, we've basically given you the rundown of the original story. He was sitting outside. In fact, I might just want to fact check this with you as well. He was sitting outside a movie theater at night, writing a check to pay for his internet bill. I mean, is that something that you would do, sitting in your car at nighttime, writing a check to pay your internet bill? Do you like
if it was due that day and I had to drop it off, that might happen.
Okay, yeah, it just seemed like an odd thing.
I can give him a little pass on that, a tiny pass.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, it's at nighttime. The place that you pay for your internet's probably closed. Are you dropping the check in the mail? It's 1996. I understand.
Maybe they have a drop box.
Maybe that's what I thought.
They used to have drop boxes.
But anyway, so he's sitting there in the dark. I've heard. He's sitting there in the dark. These two weird kids come up to him. They say that they want to get in the car. They want him to take them home so that they can get money to watch this movie. It freaks him out. He drives away, looks in his rearview mirror. The kids have disappeared. Now, those are the facts of his story. What he says in the interview is that the story has been retold so many times by so many people, and that one little fact changes every single time somebody recounts the story, that now it has become a story that isn't, it's just been turned into
unrecognizable,
a monster. Right? Yeah. So, again, as I said right at the beginning of this, I have explored this topic. I've tried to trace back stories. The further back you go, the less information there is, to the point where you reach zero information. Nothing goes beyond 1996 or even, in fact, 2013 when it all came about.
I had trouble finding dates or last names on any story.
Anything at all. So, as much as I want to believe in this creepy idea that black-eyed kids might be demons, or some people say that they might be hybrids, like between extraterrestrials and humans. They might be vampires, which I think is a huge, big stretch. I call bullshit on this one. I say it's a modern urban legend, and it's no more than that. Created by Brian Bethel, who wanted to put a very well constructed, cool, scary story on a paranormal thread that he might have been reading and chatting with people about. It's the 90s version of Reddit stories. It's the 90s version of creepypasta, and that's all I'm gonna chalk it up to. I'm going to put it out there that I do not believe that black-eyed kids are real.
I agree with you 100%.
Absolutely. Good. Okay.
I've never seen one. They must not exist.
I've never seen it. But again, I do invite anybody out there who is listening, if you've got a very strong opinion, or if you've got anything that you would like to say and that kind of contradicts what we've been talking about here today, go ahead and get hold of us. You can reach us on email at info@xspodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram at xspodcast. You can look for us on Twitter at Xander Stone 10. And you can drop us a message and give us some information, because I don't know about you, Stone, but I would absolutely love to hear from people who can bring any sort of evidence or proof about black-eyed kids. Outside of these modern accounts and modern threads of black-eyed children, I wanted to go and see, as well as I usually do, if there's any evidence or any folklore around black-eyed children. And two that I came across, one is from the Native American Iroquois people, and the other one is a Scandinavian legend. And on looking a little bit more into the Iroquois legend of the black-eyed kids, I came across a wonderful site called ineversausageaplace.com. I don't know where they got the name from, but it's called ineversausageaplace.com. And what they've written here about the black-eyed kids of the Iroquois legends is that, like many world societies, the Iroquois talk of good energy and bad energy. The positive life force, or the divine energy, was called something that sounded like Orenda. Since many of the Iroquois linguistic nuances were not documented officially, there is some debate as to the correct pronunciation, but not the concept of Orenda. The positive energy of Orenda could be channeled to do anything and could be enhanced through virtue, training, and life experience. The opposite of Orenda, the positive vibe, is the negative vibe, and that's called Otkon, O-T-K-O-N. The Otkon is a broad term for the negative energy, negative things, beings, and forces that live in the world around us. And they also try to penetrate this world from the underworld, the skies or other dimensions of consciousness and reality. Otkon was considered to be, by the Iroquois, an evil energy that could possess, destroy, and be focused as a weapon against people, objects, and animals. Now, some historical accounts have stated that the Mohawks of the Mohawk Valley believed strongly in the existence of witchcraft, and those who wielded the negative power of Otkon were often said to be influenced by the evil-minded one. The dark archetype was a Satan-like being who some said took the form of a reptilian snake man. It is said that the evil-minded one was trying to manifest itself in human form and often tried mating with unsuspecting Iroquois women. The result of this union was a possessed offspring with black eyes and pale, chalky skin. A black-eyed infant was usually killed at birth by the tribal elders and burned to prevent resurrection. These black-eyed kids, or BEKs as they're called in modern times, often never lived past a day or two after they opened their eyes. Oftentimes, unlucky Iroquois children who found themselves lost or alone in the woods were easy targets for the evil-minded one to project their Otkon into. Children would wander from tribe to tribe and come back empty with black eyes replacing their once normal eyes. It was said that the evil-minded one had stolen their Orenda, their positive vibes, and replaced it with Otkin, the negative vibes, and they were now his loyal servants, doing his bidding and infecting other children with the Otkon. The black-eyed kids were said to be peculiar acting, repeated themselves frequently, and paced around nervously. These evil black-eyed kids caused havoc amongst their tribes, and their goal was essentially to destroy the tribe and infect the other children. Now, of course, this lends its idea to things like infanticide or, killing newborn unwanted children. So whether or not this was just something, or, children that were maybe born with deformities that couldn't be explained back in olden times. But yes, so this idea of the black-eyed children exists with the Iroquois legends, and it's that their souls were possessed by this the evil one, the evil-minded one. Now, there's also these Scandinavian legends or Scandinavian mythology, and there is a creature called Myling, or sometimes known as Utburt, and which means that which is outside. And it seems that this actually refers to the unspoken family practice of child infanticide again. So there's a definite connection there between, killing babies and mythology and folklore. A Myling is believed to be a restless child spirit that was abandoned and left to die in a remote area, such as out in the wilderness, or weirdly, as this article suggests, in outhouses, which, to the best of my knowledge, is an outdoor toilet. But regardless, it's the restless spirit of a child left out in the wilderness or by the outhouses by their parents without a proper burial. Sometimes a mother is unable to care for her child, and they want to conceal the death of the child, or they want to conceal an undesirable birth. These spirits are thought to be seeking revenge, having been denied a name and a proper burial, and are reported to haunt the dwellings of the parents who abandoned them, or the place where they were left to die, and are described as being slender with hollow eyes. They are also believed to sometimes ask travelers to give them a name or to ask permission for something, or if the parents go on to have more children, come back to claim the lives of their new children. But usually they mean to do harm to the elders of the family. It was also believed that if a child was buried under the floorboards of a house, that the Myling would sing to the family through the floor. So there's these definite connections between infanticide or, the killing of children, that they seem to come back evil and possessed and wanting to haunt the families and the people in the village. So that pretty much brings us to the end of our episode about black-eyed kids. And again, I just want to reiterate that anybody in the paranormal community, if they can contest or provide any evidence or just have a very strong opinion about black-eyed kids, go ahead and reach out to us. You can contact us on email at info@xspodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram at xspodcast, or you can reach out to us on Twitter at Xander Stone 10. So, Stone, do you have any shout-outs that you want to do this week?
I do, to a couple of new listeners in Phoenix, Arizona, Matthew and Amy.
Hello, Matthew and Amy.
Hello.
It's almost like you're expecting them to say hello back to you, aren't you? Like there's an awkward pause where I'm like, and they're not going to be able to reply. I do not have any shout outs specifically this week, but I do want to apologize to the listeners because we didn't release an episode the previous week. We didn't release an episode last week. And just to give a little bit of a reason why is because I suffered from the abduction. I suffered from the most shocking abduction. I spent a week with the aliens. Everything's fine.
Still bouncing back.
Just got back. I had the most shocking allergies that caused me to breathe down the microphone in a most undesirable way. And so we thought it best just to take a week off and give it a break and then bounce back this week. So my apologies to the listeners for the lack of episode last week, but it was completely unavoidable.
Glad you're feeling better.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was having a really swell time, and I mean that because my face was swelling up. Yeah, it's something called allergic rhinitis, and I think it's also kind of linked to my rosacea because I get I don't know why am I telling the general public my medical problems? But it basically causes my eyes and my entire face to swell up. And when you're walking in a cold wind or in the winter and you've been licking your lips and they kind of get sore and stingy and clammy and you need like chapstick or whatever to help your lips out.
I do. I really do.
I get that, but on my whole face. And it's really, really uncomfortable. And then I have to pump myself full of antihistamines, and a lot of histamine in your system. I start to get anxiety, and I'm pretty fucking grumpy, to be quite honest. So
it's just so sexy.
This
all needs to go on your Tinder profile.
Just swollen and wheezy and bitchy, and that's how I roll.
See you Saturday.
So to our listeners, thank you for creeping around in the shadows with us today. From me, Xander.
And me, Stone.
Remember to live life in excess.